First hours, when the sky refused to stop. It begins like any other rainstorm. Clouds gather over the eastern seaboard, and New York City residents glance upward with mild annoyance before ducking beneath awnings and hailing cabs. The rain falls steadily over Central Park, dimples the surface of the Hudson River, and drums against the steel shoulders of the Brooklyn Bridge. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. But the hours pass, and the rain does not stop. Midnight comes, and it is still falling. Dawn arrives gray and wet, and it is still falling. By the end of the first full day, meteorologists across the country begin exchanging calls that carry an unfamiliar tremor of confusion. Something is wrong with the atmosphere. Something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. Within 48 hours, the National Weather Service issues alerts unlike any in its history. Every city in the contiguous United States is reporting continuous rainfall. Not scattered showers, not regional systems, everything. Phoenix, Arizona, where residents average 300 days of sunshine per year and the Sonoran Desert bakes at 115 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, is soaking under 2 inches of standing water. The Mojave Desert, one of the driest places on Earth, receives more rainfall in 36 hours than it typically sees in a decade. The Los Angeles Basin, built on the geological memory of drought, begins filling from the bottom up as its famously inadequate storm drain system, designed to handle a modest 2 inches per hour in limited zones, fails almost immediately under sustained downpour. The physics of what is happening staggers scientists. For rain to fall without interruption globally, the hydrological cycle must be running in a catastrophic loop. Evaporation and condensation spinning faster than any model predicted possible. Atmospheric moisture content has increased by an estimated 35% above baseline. The energy required to sustain this system is enormous, redirected from normal weather patterns, effectively freezing the jet stream in an impossible configuration. Temperatures drop across the board. Chicago, already familiar with brutal winters, plunges 8 degrees Fahrenheit below its seasonal average within 3 days as sunlight struggles to penetrate cloud cover now 12 miles thick in places. Emergency services mobilize. The Federal Emergency Management Agency activates every regional protocol simultaneously, a scenario its planners once considered inconceivable. 13 million gallons of water per minute are flowing through drainage systems never engineered for perpetual load. And on the horizon, barely visible through the curtain of endless rain, something ancient and patient is beginning to wake. First weeks, the drowning of ordinary life. By the end of the first week, the word emergency has lost its urgency through sheer repetition. Every city in America is in a state of emergency. Every governor has made the declaration. The president has addressed the nation 3 times from the Oval Office. Each speech grimmer than the last. Each one delivered to an audience huddled inside, while water rises against their front doors. The ordinary machinery of American life grinds to a halt with surprising speed. Roads that handle 400 million vehicle trips per day become rivers. Interstate 10 through Houston, one of the widest highways on Earth with up to 26 lanes in some stretches, disappears beneath 6 feet of brown, churning water within 12 days. Supply chains, already fragile from previous disruptions, begin snapping link by link. Grocery stores run out of shelf-stable food within 5 days in major metropolitan areas as delivery trucks cannot navigate flooded roads. 40 million Americans in low-lying neighborhoods face immediate displacement. The Mississippi River, already one of the most powerful drainage systems in the world, swells to 3 times its flood stage width. It consumes entire counties in Illinois, Missouri, and Louisiana, erasing towns that have existed since before the Civil War. The Army Corps of Engineers opens every floodgate it controls and still cannot keep pace. By day 21, the river is 40 miles wide in certain stretches near New Orleans, a city that sits, in many places, 8 feet below sea level, now fighting for its very existence beneath a sky that will not relent. Electricity becomes the next casualty. Underground substations flood. Transformer stations short out. Rolling blackouts spread across 43 states within the first month. Without power, water treatment plants go offline. Without treated water, sanitation collapses. Cities of millions of people begin facing conditions typically associated with disaster zones in the developing world, but with no outside help arriving because the disaster is everywhere at once. Houston's Texas Medical Center, the largest medical complex on Earth with 61 institutions and 100,000 employees, evacuates patients by boat. Human adaptability is remarkable, and it begins showing itself in these early weeks. Communities form around high ground. Church steeples and parking garage rooftops become neighborhood hubs. Amateur radio operators re-establish communication grids. But beneath the surface of human resilience, the land itself is beginning a transformation that no amount of human ingenuity will reverse. First year, the new geography of a soaked earth. 365 days of continuous rain. 1 full year. The numbers by this point are staggering in their scale and their intimacy. The United States alone has received an average of 89 inches of rainfall, more than double what even the wettest parts of the Pacific Northwest typically accumulate. The Appalachian Mountains are streaming with waterfalls on every slope, some of them hundreds of feet tall, carved into existence over the course of a single year by relentless water finding every crack and weakness in ancient rock. The Blue Ridge Parkway, one of America's most celebrated scenic drives, has been destroyed in over 200 locations by landslides. The human population has reorganized itself along vertical lines. Elevation is survival. Denver, sitting at 1 mile above sea level, has become the most densely populated city in North America. Its population swollen from 700,000 to nearly 4 million, as climate refugees from the drowned lowlands pour into the Rocky Mountain foothills. San Francisco, perched on its famous hills, survives as a kind of island archipelago, its neighborhood separated by channels where streets once ran. The Golden Gate Bridge still stands, its towers rising above the bay that has expanded to consume much of the surrounding lowlands, but no traffic crosses it. The roadway is washed out in multiple sections, and the structure itself has begun showing signs of accelerated corrosion from the constant moisture and salt spray driven inland by relentless storm winds. Ecologically, a year of constant rain has triggered an explosion of life in some regions and total collapse in others. Forests that were adapted to wet climates, the temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, have expanded enormously. But the prairie grasslands of Kansas and Nebraska, never designed to tolerate waterlogged soil, have died en masse. Root systems drowned. The topsoil, once the richest agricultural land on Earth, a 6-inch layer of black gold built over 10,000 years, has eroded into rivers and washed toward the sea. 40% of American cropland is no longer cultivable. Food production has fallen 62% from pre-event levels. The caloric mathematics are brutal. 330 million Americans now compete for the food output of a system reduced to a fraction of its former capacity. with transportation networks unable to move what little is produced. The hunger is not yet famine, but the distance between the two is measured now in months rather than years. Years 1 to 10. The decade of unraveling. The first decade of permanent rain dismantles civilizations with a patience that feels almost geological in its thoroughness. The systems human beings spent 2 centuries building across the American continent. The electrical grids, the highway networks, the water treatment infrastructure, the agricultural supply chains, the financial institutions housed in vulnerable lowland buildings crumble not in dramatic explosions, but in gradual, incremental failures that accumulate until one day the system simply does not function anymore. By year 3, the national power grid, already stressed beyond design parameters, has fragmented into isolated regional microgrids serving only the highest elevations. By year 5, the internet as Americans knew it exists only in patchy, unreliable segments. The satellite infrastructure still orbits above the clouds, but ground stations are flooded or abandoned. The coastlines of America are unrecognizable by year 7. Miami, built on a limestone shelf barely 6 feet above sea level, no longer exists as a functioning city. Its population of 400,000 dispersed in the early years, driving inland in a mass migration that echoed the Dust Bowl exodus of the 1930s, but on a scale 10 times larger. The Art Deco hotels of South Beach stand in 12 feet of water, their pastel facades fading beneath algae and barnacles. In New York, the subway system flooded permanently by year 2. And by year 6, Lower Manhattan, south of Chambers Street, is accessible only by boat at low water. The Statue of Liberty still rises from what has become a vast inland bay, her torch barely visible through the great curtain of perpetual rain, a monument to a civilization renegotiating its relationship with the natural world in real time. The human death toll by the end of the first decade reaches approximately 480 million globally, driven primarily by waterborne disease, famine, and conflict over high-ground territory. In the United States, population centers above 2,000 feet elevation hold steady, fed by vertical farming operations, greenhouse agriculture under sealed canopies, and fishing in the vast new water bodies that cover former farmland. An entire new culture of water navigation emerges. Children born after year 3 have never seen a horizon that was not gray. The Willis Tower in Chicago still stands, its 110 stories rising above the perpetually flooded Chicago basin like a steel monument to ambition. Engineers using drone technology confirm its structural integrity remains intact through year 9. It has become, improbably, a lighthouse. Years 10 to 50. Nature rewrites the map. By the time a full decade has passed, the world's rivers have collectively delivered enough sediment to the ocean to measurably raise the seafloor in certain coastal areas. But the more dramatic transformation is what the water is doing to the land itself. Erosion, normally measured in geological time, is accelerating at a rate that compresses centuries into decades. The Grand Canyon, already one of Earth's most dramatic geological features, carved by the Colorado River over 5 million years, is widening by an estimated 30 feet per year as side canyon walls collapse under saturated conditions. By year 25, it has expanded its width in certain sections by a quarter mile, an amount that would normally require 100,000 years to achieve. The ecological reshuffling is as dramatic as the physical transformation. Species that evolved for wet environments are expanding their ranges at extraordinary rates. Mosses and ferns colonize what were once desert landscapes in the American Southwest. Alligators, extraordinarily adaptable creatures, have been documented as far north as St. Louis by year 18, swimming through what was once Missouri farmland. Salmon runs in the Pacific Northwest, once threatened by dam construction and habitat loss, have exploded in size. Beaver populations have tripled, and their dam-building activity is creating thousands of new wetland ecosystems across the continent. Human survivors, numbering perhaps 180 million in North America by year 30, have organized themselves into elevated communities with increasingly sophisticated water-based economies. The Rocky Mountain corridor from Denver to Salt Lake City has become the most densely inhabited region of the continent, with a population density approaching that of pre-rain New Jersey. These communities have developed remarkable engineering solutions: covered aqueducts that manage rainfall runoff, fungal agriculture that thrives in low-light perpetual moisture conditions, lightweight corrosion-resistant building materials fabricated from river-deposited sediment and bioplastics. Mount Rushmore, carved into the granite of the Black Hills of South Dakota at an elevation of roughly 5,500 feet, survives the first 50 years remarkably well. The granite is hard enough to resist the accelerated erosion, but the expressions of Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Lincoln are beginning to blur at the edges, softened by water that finds every microscopic crack and slowly, patiently widens it. By year 45, Lincoln's nose has shed 6 inches of stone. Years 50 to 100. The century of transformation. The halfway point of the first century under permanent rain marks a civilization that would be genuinely unrecognizable to anyone born before the event. North America is no longer a continent of cities in the pre-rain sense. It is a continent of nodes, elevated islands of human habitation connected by waterway networks and aerial routes, surrounded by vast wetland ecosystems that pulse with biological activity of startling richness. The Mississippi River no longer has a single defined channel. It is spread across a floodplain 600 miles wide in certain sections, a shallow inland sea that reaches from the Appalachians to the Rockies in a broad, marshy corridor. Biologists have taken to calling it the New American Sea. The structural remains of the great pre-rain cities are still present, but are transforming rapidly. In Chicago, the Willis Tower's steel frame has survived, but the building's glass and interior components have long since failed. It stands as an open steel lattice, colonized by nesting birds and climbing vegetation, a kind of vertical ecosystem rising from the shallow lake that was once Lakeshore Drive. The Empire State Building in New York is partially submerged to its 30th floor. Its upper 70 floors jut above the permanent flood line, visible from miles away, used by navigators as a landmark the way sailors once used lighthouses. No one has been inside it since year 11. Globally, the Earth's climate system has reached a new equilibrium that is nonetheless violently different from what existed before. The permanent cloud cover has reduced incoming solar radiation by approximately 22%, driving average surface temperatures down by 7 degrees Fahrenheit from pre-rain levels. This cooling effect has partially offset the warming that would otherwise result from increased water vapor, creating a strange climatic balance, a cold, wet, dim world. Ice sheets that were retreating before the event have stabilized and in some polar regions are advancing again. Human population globally has stabilized at approximately 1.2 billion, down from 8 billion before the rain began. The losses came in waves: initial drowning and displacement, then disease, then famine, then the resource conflicts of the middle decades. What remains is a species that has been profoundly selected for adaptability, for cooperation, for the ability to live vertically and move on water. The genetic bottleneck of the century will leave its mark on human populations for thousands of generations. Years 100 to 500. Nature's patient reclamation. By the 200th year of continuous rain, the physical infrastructure of the pre-rain civilization is approaching its structural end of life at an accelerated rate. Steel corrodes. Concrete, despite its apparent durability, is destroyed by water infiltrating its microscopic pores, freezing, expanding, and cracking the matrix from within in the higher elevations, or simply dissolving its calcium components in the perpetually wet lowlands. The great bridges of America are falling. The Golden Gate Bridge loses its first major span section around year 140, its high-tensile steel cables having corroded past their safety threshold despite no one being present to measure them. The Brooklyn Bridge, with its older steel, fails at year 180. The tower still standing, but the roadway and cables collapsed into the water below. The Hoover Dam presents a different story. Concrete structures of its mass and design, wedged into canyon walls, are among the most durable human constructions ever built. By year 200, the dam still holds, though Lake Mead behind it has long since transformed from a reservoir into something new. A complex wetland system where sedimentation has created dozens of islands, hosting unique ecosystems found nowhere else on Earth. The dam itself has become a geological feature rather than a human one. A hard line in the landscape that water flows over rather than through. Its mechanical components long since seized and corroded. Human civilization at the 500-year mark is concentrated almost entirely above 3,000 feet of elevation globally. Total world population has recovered slightly to approximately 2 billion. Organized in thousands of small, sophisticated city-states connected by advanced watercraft and lighter-than-air dirigible technology, which thrives in the dense, moist atmosphere. These societies have developed extraordinary biological expertise, having spent centuries learning to cultivate the new ecosystems around them. They farm kelp and freshwater algae in the vast inland seas. They harvest the timber of the immense forests that have grown over former cities. They have domesticated several new species, including large aquatic mammals and engineering-scale insects, whose silk-equivalent secretions produce waterproof structural materials. Language, art, religion, and memory of the pre-rain world survive in these communities as mythology. The drowned world below is called in various cultures the deep place, the old floor, the bright time. Children are told stories of a world where the sky was blue, where a burning light hung above, where the ground was dry enough to run barefoot across. These stories are received the way modern children receive stories of knights and dragons. Years 500 to 1000. The emergence of the New World. 1,000 years of unceasing rain has fundamentally rewritten the biography of the planet. The America that existed before is now an archaeological layer beneath hundreds of feet of sediment and biological accumulation. The New American Sea, that vast interior wetland that replaced the Mississippi drainage basin, has deepened and widened further, becoming a genuine inland body of water comparable in scale to a shallow version of the ancient Cretaceous Seaway that split North America in two 100 million years ago. The Appalachian Mountains, already old and worn before the rain began, have shed enormous amounts of material and now present lower, rounder profiles. The Rockies, harder and younger geologically, stand more dramatically than ever, their peaks emerging from permanent cloud like the spines of some enormous creature sleeping beneath the weather. The human cultures of this millennium are as different from pre-rain civilization as medieval Europe was from ancient Sumer. And yet, there are continuities. Mathematics survives. Music survives. The impulse to record and transmit knowledge survives. The communities of the elevated zones have developed writing systems descended from, but distinct from English, incorporating new concepts for which the old language had no words. The 50 varieties of rain distinguished by a people for whom rain is the primary sensory backdrop of existence. The navigational vocabulary of waterway travel so precise, it rivals the terminology of pre-rain aerospace engineering. The Hoover Dam fails around year 700. The accumulated structural fatigue of centuries of hydrostatic pressure and chemical dissolution finally overcomes even its enormous concrete mass. The collapse is gradual over about 40 years, not a dramatic single event. A progressive failure of sections that allows the water behind it to erode its way through incrementally. When the last section gives way, the event is so slow that the fish and birds nesting in the breach barely notice. Within a century of its final failure, the site is indistinguishable from the surrounding canyon landscape. Only the concrete rubble at the canyon bottom, detectable by the human geologists who descend by watercraft to study it, marks where one of America's greatest engineering achievements once stood. The Space Needle in Seattle, defying all expectations, has survived to this point. Its unique structural design, narrow stem and broad top, has shed water and wind effectively. It stands above the Seattle Highlands community of 40,000 people as both a functional communications tower and a sacred monument. Years 1,000 to 10,000. The deep transformation. 10,000 years is the unit of time in which human civilizations rise and fall under normal conditions. Under permanent rain, 10,000 years is the unit of time in which the planet itself undergoes transformation profound enough to be legible in the fossil record millions of years hence. The rain, still falling after 10 millennia, has deposited an estimated 200 feet of new sedimentary material across the lowland basins of the former continental United States. This layer, geologists of the distant future will identify it as clearly as we identify the KPG boundary layer that marks the dinosaur extinction, will be dense with the compressed remnants of human civilization. Microplastics, refined metals, engineered polymers, the chemical signatures of agriculture and industry. It will be called, in the nomenclature of whatever civilization eventually studies it, the Anthropocene terminus layer. The biological transformation at the 10,000-year mark is genuinely evolutionary. Species have had sufficient generational time to undergo measurable genetic change in response to the new environment. Bird species that previously occupied diverse niches have converged toward water-adapted forms. Several species of small mammals have begun showing webbed digit development through natural selection pressure. In the vast inland seas, fish species have diversified explosively into the newly available ecological space, a radiation event comparable to the adaptive explosion that followed the clearing of the dinosaurs. The world is, by every biological measure, richer in species than it was before the rain began, though the composition of life is radically different. Human beings, numbering approximately 4 billion globally by year 10,000, having recovered from their population nadir through the adaptive pressures of the intervening millennia, are anatomically and perhaps cognitively distinct from pre-rain Homo sapiens. They are, on average, shorter and more compact. Adaptations that reduce heat loss in a cooler, wetter world. Their vitamin D metabolism has shifted significantly, relying more heavily on dietary sources since sunlight rarely penetrates the cloud layer. Their respiratory systems have adapted to air with approximately 12% higher humidity than pre-rain baselines. The Space Needle finally collapsed around year 2300, its steel yielding to 9 centuries of corrosion. It fell into the water with no witnesses and no record. Its passing was as unnoticed as the falling of any other tree in a forest that has grown over the remains of a civilization that believed, for a brief and brilliant time, that it had mastered the sky. Final reflection: what the rain revealed. And so we arrive at the end of this thought experiment, standing at the shore of an imagined future and looking back at the single unbroken thread of consequence that began with one cloud that refused to clear. What does a year of unceasing rain, stretched across geological time in its implications, reveal about the world we actually inhabit today? It reveals, first and most urgently, the breathtaking fragility of the systems we have built and the breathtaking speed with which they would unravel. The electrical grid that powers the United States, a network so complex it is considered one of the most sophisticated machines ever built by human beings, begins failing within weeks of a scenario it was never designed to survive. The food supply chains that deliver fresh produce to every corner of the country depend on roads that are themselves only inches above the water table in countless locations. The cities we have built in floodplains and coastal zones and river deltas, New Orleans, Miami, Houston, New York, represent accumulated risk that the rain simply converts to accumulated consequence. It reveals, second, the extraordinary resilience of the human animal. 10,000 years into permanent rain, people still exist. They have adapted. They have built new cultures, new technologies, new ways of being in a world that would kill the people of today within months. Every generation of survivors passed something forward, some knowledge, some story, some tool. And each generation of children was a little better suited than the last to the world as it actually was, rather than the world as it used to be. This is not comfortable consolation. It is paid for in catastrophic loss. But it is real. It reveals, third, that the natural world operates on timescales that make human civilization look like a morning dream. The Grand Canyon took 5 million years to form. The rain deepened it meaningfully in decades. The Atlantic Ocean took tens of millions of years to open. The new American Sea formed in centuries. Nature is not slow. Nature is simply patient, and it uses whatever forces are available to it. We have always lived inside a system of almost incomprehensible power, and we have mistaken its current stillness for permanent permission. The rain that begins this scenario is, of course, impossible as a literal event. The atmosphere holds finite water. The physics do not allow for true perpetual rain in the way this scenario imagines it. But the forces it represents, the gathering weight of water in a warming world, the fragility of infrastructure to hydrological stress, the speed with which climate shifts can cascade into civilizational crisis, these are not imaginary at all. They are present. They are measurable. They are already, in ways less dramatic, but no less real than our scenario, reshaping the geography of the planet and the possibilities of human life upon it. The Empire State Building still jutting from the floodwater. The Space Needle standing alone on its hill, Mount Rushmore's faces slowly softening in the rain. These are images of loss, but they are also images of time. Reminders that everything human beings build is a conversation with impermanence. And the most honest thing we can say about our civilization is that it was here, and it was remarkable, and the water remembered us long after we learned to live within it.